The stagecoach rattled into Fort Stockton, Texas, on a bitter January morning in 1878, and Lucy Hartford clutched her woolen coat tighter around her swollen belly, praying the driver wouldn't notice the way she moved or the fear in her eyes. She had traveled 3 weeks from Philadelphia to become the mail order bride of a rancher named Thomas Granger, a man whose letters had promised her a fresh start and asked no questions about her past. And now, as the dusty frontier town came into view with its adobe buildings and wooden storefronts, she wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The baby kicked beneath her ribs, a reminder that she had no choice but to go forward, no matter what awaited her at the end of this journey. The stagecoach jerked to a halt outside the Wells Fargo office, and Lucy took a deep breath before accepting the driver's hand to step down. Her legs trembled after so many days of travel, and she had to steady herself against the coach's side. The coat she wore was deliberately oversized, purchased from a secondhand shop in St. Louis specifically to hide her condition. She was 6 months along now, and while the heavy winter clothing helped conceal her shape, she knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. "Miss Hartford?" A weathered man with gray whiskers approached, his hat in his hands. "I'm Paul Hendricks, foreman at the Granger Ranch. Mr. Granger sent me to fetch you." Lucy's heart sank. She had hoped Thomas himself would meet her, that she might have a chance to explain her situation privately before they reached his property. "Mr. Granger didn't come himself?" Paul's expression grew uncomfortable. "No, miss. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Mr. Granger took ill about 2 weeks back. Pneumonia. He passed 4 days ago." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Lucy grabbed the stagecoach wheel for support, her mind reeling. Dead. The man she had traveled halfway across the country to marry was dead, and she was pregnant with another man's child in a frontier town where she knew no one. "I see," she managed to whisper, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm real sorry, miss," Paul continued, genuine sympathy in his weathered face. "The boys at the ranch, we took up a collection to buy you a ticket back east if you need it. We know this ain't what you signed up for." "That's very kind." Lucy's mind raced. She couldn't go back to Philadelphia. Her father had disowned her when he discovered her condition, and James, the married man who had fathered her child, had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. Thomas Granger's advertisement seeking a bride had seemed like divine intervention, especially when he had mentioned in his letters that he was a widower in his 50s who simply wanted companionship and help running his household. She had planned to tell him about the baby after they married, hoping his desire for a wife would outweigh his shock at her condition. "I don't have anywhere to go back to." Paul shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Well, the thing is, miss, Granger's nephew is inheriting the ranch, fellow named Gideon Davis. He's been working the place for about 3 years now, and Thomas left everything to him. Gideon's a good man, real hard worker, but I don't rightly know what he'll want to do about your situation." "Where is Mr. Davis now?" "He's at the ranch. Been working himself near to death these past days, dealing with the property and the funeral arrangements and everything else. I was heading back there now. I can take you with me if you like, let you talk to him. Or I can take you to the hotel in town, and you can figure out what you want to do." Lucy considered her options. She had exactly $12 to her name, hardly enough for a hotel room for more than a few nights, let alone a ticket back east. At least at the ranch, she might be able to plead her case, perhaps offer to work as a housekeeper in exchange for room and board until she could figure out her next move. "I'll come with you to the ranch, if Mr. Davis won't mind. Can't say what he'll think, but he's not the kind to turn a woman out without hearing her story first." Paul gestured to her trunk, which the driver had set on the ground. "That all your luggage?" "Yes, just the one trunk." Paul loaded it into the back of a weathered wagon, then helped Lucy onto the seat. As they rolled out of town, she studied the landscape with growing apprehension. Fort Stockton was situated in a harsh, arid region, the winter air cold but dry, the vegetation sparse and scrubby. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with snow. It was beautiful in its own stark way, but utterly foreign to someone who had spent her entire life in the green, crowded streets of Philadelphia. "How far is the ranch?" she asked. "About an hour's ride." The Granger place, well, the Davis place now, I suppose, sits along Comanche Creek. Good water, decent grazing. Thomas built it up from nothing over 30 years. Did right well for himself. Paul glanced at her. You warm enough? I got an extra blanket under the seat if you need it. I'm fine, thank you. Lucy pulled her coat closer, very aware of the bulk it concealed. What sort of man is Gideon Davis? Paul was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Honest, fair, works harder than any two men I know. He came out from Missouri after his parents died, didn't know nothing about ranching, but he learned quick. Thomas thought the world of him. Only thing is, Gideon's got a hardness to him sometimes. Lost a woman he was fixing to marry about a year back. She decided ranch life wasn't for her and went back east. I think it stung his pride more than broke his heart, if I'm being honest, but it made him more closed off than he used to be. How old is he? 26, I reckon. Maybe 27 now. Relief washed through Lucy. At least he wasn't some elderly man who might be shocked by her youth. She was 22 herself, and while the 9-year age gap would have concerned her parents in the life she had left behind, it seemed perfectly reasonable under the circumstances. The wagon rolled on through the empty landscape. Occasionally they passed cattle bearing the Granger brand, hardy longhorns that barely glanced up as they drove by. Lucy tried to prepare what she would say to Gideon Davis, but every speech she rehearsed in her head sounded more desperate than the last. Finally, they crested a low rise and the ranch came into view. It was larger than Lucy had expected, with a solid 2-story house built of adobe and wood, a big barn, several outbuildings, and a network of corrals. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see horses in one of the paddocks. Despite everything, she felt a flicker of hope. This was a real home, a prosperous operation. Surely there would be some way she could make herself useful here. Paul pulled the wagon up to the house. Wait here a moment. Let me see if Gideon's inside. Lucy sat in the wagon, her hands clasped tightly over her belly, and waited. Through the window, she could see movement, and then the front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, and even from a distance, Lucy could tell he was nothing like she had imagined. Gideon Davis was tall and lean, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of someone who spent every day working under the sun. He wore work clothes, denim trousers, and a faded shirt, and his dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. But it was his face that caught her attention, strong-featured and serious, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wasn't handsome in a refined way, but there was something compelling about him, a presence that made her breath catch. He listened as Paul spoke, his expression unreadable, and then his gaze shifted to Lucy. For a long moment their eyes met, and she felt as though he could see right through her coat, through all her carefully constructed lies and desperate plans. Then he was walking toward the wagon, his stride purposeful. Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs. Miss Hartford. His voice was deep, with a hint of a Missouri drawl. I'm Gideon Davis. Paul tells me you've had quite a shock. Yes. Lucy's voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm very sorry for your loss. Your uncle seemed like a good man from his letters. He was. Gideon's expression softened slightly. This is a hell of a situation for you to find yourself in. Paul says you don't have anywhere to go back to? No, sir. He studied her for another long moment, and Lucy had the distinct impression he was weighing his words carefully. Well, you've traveled a long way. Come inside at least. Get warm and have something to eat. We can figure out what to do from there. He reached up to help her down from the wagon, and as Lucy took his hand, her foot slipped on the step. She stumbled forward with a gasp, and Gideon caught her, his hands steadying her by the shoulders. For a moment she was pressed against him, and she felt the hardness of her belly bump against his stomach. Gideon went very still. His hands remained on her shoulders, but his gaze dropped, taking in the way her coat bulged awkwardly, the way she instinctively moved to cover herself even as she stepped back. Understanding flickered across his face, followed by something else, something she couldn't quite read. "You're expecting," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Lucy's face flamed with shame and fear. She wanted to lie, to deny it, but what was the point? He knew now. "Yes," she whispered. "I was going to tell your uncle after we were married. I hoped he might still want a wife, even if I came with complications. I know it was wrong not to tell him in my letters, but I was desperate. My father disowned me. The father of the baby is married and wanted nothing to do with us. I had nowhere else to turn." She waited for Gideon to order her off his property, to call her the names she had heard whispered in Philadelphia, to look at her with the disgust she had seen in her father's eyes. Instead, he simply nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "How far along?" "6 months. And you traveled all the way from Pennsylvania in that condition?" "I didn't have a choice." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Then he said something that shocked her to her core. "Come inside. You look about ready to fall over, and standing out here in the cold isn't good for you or the baby." Lucy stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You're not sending me away?" "Not before you've had a meal and a rest, at least. Come on." He turned and headed toward the house, leaving Lucy to follow in stunned silence. The interior of the ranch house was warm and surprisingly well kept. The main room had a stone fireplace with a cheerful fire burning, comfortable furniture that showed signs of use but not neglect, and whitewashed walls decorated with simple paintings of landscapes. It was a man's home, but not an uncivilized one. "Sit down before you fall down," Gideon said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning, I think. I had some bread and cheese on the stagecoach." He shook his head and disappeared into what must have been the kitchen. Lucy sank into the chair, exhausted beyond measure. She could hear him moving around, the clatter of dishes, and a few minutes later he returned with a plate of cold roast beef, bread, butter, and some pickled vegetables. "It's not fancy, but it's filling. There's coffee, too, if you want it." "Thank you." Lucy took the plate with trembling hands. The smell of the food made her stomach growl audibly, and she realized she was starving. She forced herself to eat slowly, aware of Gideon watching her from across the room. He had poured himself a cup of coffee and now stood leaning against the mantel, his expression unreadable. "Tell me about yourself, Lucy Hartford. The truth this time." So she did. Sitting in that warm room, eating the first real meal she'd had in days, Lucy told him everything about her life in Philadelphia as the daughter of a prosperous merchant, about James, the married man who had courted her with pretty words and promises he never intended to keep, about the shame when her condition became known, her father's rage, being cast out of the only home she'd ever known, about seeing Thomas Granger's advertisement and seeing it as her last hope for a life that wasn't destitution or worse. Gideon listened without interrupting, his face grave. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "That took courage," he finally said, "telling me all that. Most folks would have kept lying, tried to pass the baby off as my uncle's or some such thing." "I'm tired of lying," Lucy said softly. "And you already knew the truth anyway. There didn't seem much point in making it worse." "No, I suppose not." Gideon set down his coffee cup. "Here's the situation as I see it. You need a place to stay and a way to support yourself and the baby when it comes. I need help running this house. My uncle's wife died 10 years back, and since then it's just been him and me and the ranch hands keeping things going. We can cook enough to keep from starving and do laundry when we run out of clean clothes, but that's about it. The house needs a woman's touch, if I'm being honest." Lucy's heart began to beat faster. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you room and board in exchange for housekeeping and cooking. It's not much, but it would give you time to figure out your next step. Or to stay, and if you wanted to. There's a bedroom upstairs you could have. It's got a good bed and faces south, so it catches the sun. Would be a nice room for a baby, too. Why would you do this? Lucy couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. You could be, Gideon agreed, but I don't think you are. I'm a pretty good judge of character, and you strike me as someone who made some mistakes, but is trying her best to do right by her child. Besides, it's a practical arrangement. I need help. You need a home. Seems like it could work out for both of us. What will the ranch hands think? What will people in town say? The hands work for me, and they'll keep their mouths shut or find work elsewhere. As for the town, well, that's trickier. Fort Stockton's small enough that people talk, but I'm thinking we could tell folks you're a distant cousin who came to help out after my uncle passed. A widow, maybe, who lost her husband back east. The baby would be his. People might gossip, but they won't know any different. Lucy felt tears prick her eyes. She had expected judgment, condemnation, maybe charity at best. Instead, this stranger was offering her not just a roof over her head, but a cover story to protect her reputation. Why are you being so kind to me? Gideon's expression grew distant. My mother was in a situation not unlike yours when she was young. Different circumstances, but she was expecting me when she married my father, and he knew I wasn't his. He raised me as his own anyway, never made me feel like I was less than his true son. I guess I figure everyone deserves a second chance. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay, at least until the baby comes and you're back on your feet. After that, if you want to move on, I'll help you however I can. But if you want to stay, there's a place for you here. No strings attached. Lucy looked around the warm, solid house, then back at the serious-faced man who was offering her salvation. I'll stay, she said softly, and I'll work hard, I promise. I'll earn my keep. I don't doubt it. Gideon almost smiled. Just a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his face, made him look younger and less careworn. Come on, I'll show you to your room. You look like you could sleep for a week. The room he showed her to was even nicer than he had described. It had a large bed with a real mattress, a dresser, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and there were rag rugs on the floor. It was my aunt's sewing room, Gideon explained, but she'd have wanted it used for something good. I'll have Paul bring your trunk up. Thank you, Lucy said again, feeling the words were inadequate, but not knowing what else to say. Gideon nodded and turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Lucy, welcome to the ranch. I hope you'll be happy here. After he left, Lucy sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself cry. Not from sadness or fear this time, but from relief so overwhelming it left her shaking. She had a home. She had a chance. Whatever happened next, at least she and her baby would be safe. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity as Lucy settled into her new life. True to his word, Gideon told the ranch hands that she was a widowed cousin who had come to help with the household, and if any of them doubted the story, they kept their suspicions to themselves. Paul was kind and avuncular, treating her with the same gentle respect he might show his own daughter. The other hands, a mix of experienced cowboys and younger men, tipped their hats when they saw her and thanked her politely when she fed them. Lucy threw herself into her work with determination. The house had been neglected in the months of Thomas Granger's decline, and there was much to do. She scrubbed floors and washed windows, beat rugs and sorted through closets, cooked proper meals and baked bread. The physical labor was exhausting, especially in her condition, but it felt good to be useful, to have a purpose beyond simple survival. Gideon was a quiet presence in the house. He rose before dawn and often didn't return until after dark, working himself as hard as he worked his men. But when he was there, he was unfailingly courteous, always asking if she needed anything, complimenting her cooking, offering to carry heavy things or reach items on high shelves. He never mentioned her pregnancy directly, but she noticed he was careful around her, making sure she didn't overwork herself, insisting she sit down when he thought she looked tired. Slowly, Almost without realizing it, Lucy began to relax. The knot of fear and shame that had lived in her chest for months began to loosen. She started to smile more, to hum while she worked, to look forward to the simple rhythms of ranch life. And she began to notice things about Gideon that made her heart beat a little faster. The way he was patient with the horses, talking to them in a low, soothing voice as he worked. The way he treated everyone with respect, from the most experienced ranch hand to the youngest stable boy. The way he read in the evenings, sitting by the fire with a book, his face relaxed and thoughtful. The way he sometimes caught her eye across the room and smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made her feel warm inside. It was dangerous, she knew, to let herself feel anything for him. He had offered her charity, not courtship. He was her employer, not her suitor. But as February gave way to March and she moved into her 7th month of pregnancy, Lucy found it increasingly difficult to ignore the way her pulse quickened when she heard his footsteps on the porch, or the way she looked for excuses to be in the same room with him. One evening in mid-March, a sudden spring storm rolled in, bringing sheets of rain and crackling lightning. Lucy was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard a commotion outside. Looking through the window, she saw Gideon and Paul struggling to get a panicked horse into the barn. The animal was rearing and bucking, terrified by the thunder. Without thinking, Lucy grabbed a lantern and ran outside into the rain, holding it high so they could see better. "Over here," she called. "I've got light." "Get back inside," Gideon shouted over the storm. "You'll catch your death." But Lucy held her ground, keeping the lantern steady as they finally got the horse under control and into the barn. By the time they were done, she was soaked through, her dress clinging to her body, making the curve of her belly obvious despite the shawl she'd thrown over her shoulders. Gideon came running up to her, his face fierce. "What were you thinking? You could have been hurt." "You needed light," Lucy said simply. "I helped." For a moment, he just stared at her, rain dripping from his hair, his chest heaving. Then something shifted in his expression. His gaze dropped to her belly, to the clear evidence of the life she carried, and when he looked back at her face, there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you inside before you freeze." In the house, Lucy changed into dry clothes while Gideon built up the fire. When she came back downstairs, he had made tea and was waiting for her. His own clothes changed, his hair still damp. "Sit," he ordered, and she obeyed. Taking the cup of tea he pressed into her hands. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. "You can't take risks like that," Gideon finally said. "Not in your condition. The baby's fine, I'm fine. This time, maybe. But Lucy, you need to be more careful. What if you'd fallen? What if the horse had kicked you?" "I was careful. And I'm not fragile, Gideon. I'm pregnant, not made of glass." He looked at her for a long moment, then let out a sigh. "I know that. I just worry about you." "Why?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me and my baby?" Gideon set down his cup, his movements deliberate. "You really don't know?" "Know what?" "Lucy, these past 2 months having you here, it's changed everything. This house is a home again. I look forward to coming in from work because I know you'll be here. I find myself thinking about you when I'm out on the range, wondering what you're making for supper, whether you're resting enough, if you need anything. And the baby, I think about the baby too. About whether it'll be a boy or a girl, what color eyes it'll have, who it'll look like." Lucy's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst from her chest. "Gideon, what are you saying?" He moved from his chair to kneel in front of her, taking her hands in his. His palms were calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. "I'm saying I care about you, Lucy Hartford. More than I should, probably given the circumstances. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, having you and that baby under my roof stopped being charity and started being what I wanted more than anything. I know it's not fair to tell you this. I know you're vulnerable and dependent on me. And the last thing I want is to make you feel pressured or uncomfortable. But I also can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. And what do you feel? Lucy whispered. I feel like I could love you both, Gideon said, his voice rough with emotion. You and the baby. I feel like I want to be there when that child is born, and I want to teach it to ride and rope and all the things a father should teach. I want to watch you sing lullabies and rock the cradle. I want you to stay, not because you need a roof over your head, but because you want to be here. With me. Tears were streaming down Lucy's face. I can't ask you to take on another man's child. You're not asking, I'm offering. That baby's part of you, and I already know I love you. So how could I not love your child too? He reached up to cup her face, wiping away her tears with his thumb. I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other for 2 months. But out here, Lucy, life moves different. People know what they want, and they don't waste time dancing around it. I want you. I want to marry you, if you'll have me. I want to give you my name, and give that baby a father, and build a life together. Yes, Lucy breathed. Yes, Gideon, yes. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her melt. It was nothing like the frantic, guilty kisses James had given her in darkened corners. This was a kiss of promise, of commitment, of a future stretching out before them. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through their tears. We'll go into town tomorrow, Gideon said. Talk to the preacher. We can be married by the end of the week if you want. I want, Lucy said, and kissed him again. They were married 4 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Stockton. Lucy wore a new dress that Gideon had insisted on buying her, a soft blue fabric that accommodated her shape and made her feel beautiful despite her size. Paul stood as witness along with a few of the ranch hands and some townspeople who had known Thomas Granger and wanted to pay their respects to his nephew. If anyone thought it strange that Gideon was marrying his supposedly widowed cousin so soon after his uncle's death, they kept their thoughts to themselves. Fort Stockton was a practical place, and there was nothing scandalous about a man taking a wife to help run his household and raise a child. After the ceremony, they had a simple celebration at the ranch. The hands had pitched in to create a feast, and there was music and dancing and genuine joy. Lucy found herself laughing more than she had in years, spinning carefully in Gideon's arms as someone played a fiddle, feeling protected and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. That night, alone in what was now their bedroom, Gideon was patient and gentle, mindful of her condition, but making her feel desired all the same. I love you, he whispered against her skin. I love you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it. I love you too, Lucy whispered back, and realized with wonder that it was true. In the space of 2 months, this quiet, serious man had become everything to her. Her husband, her partner, her home. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Lucy's life. Spring came to West Texas in a riot of wildflowers and warming days. The ranch work increased as calves were born, and the herd needed tending, but Gideon always made time for Lucy, sitting with her in the evenings, talking about their plans and dreams. They converted the small room next to their bedroom into a nursery, painting it yellow and building a cradle from smooth pine. Lucy sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were, how precious. Gideon would sometimes come in and find her holding up a little gown or a pair of booties, and he would wrap his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly, feeling the baby kick and roll. Strong little one, he would say with pride, as if the baby were already his in every way that mattered. In early April, Lucy woke in the middle of the night with a tightening pain across her belly. She lay still for a moment, wondering if it was nothing. But then it came again, stronger this time. Beside her, Gideon stirred. Lucy, you all right? I think the baby's coming. Gideon was out of bed in an instant, lighting a lamp, pulling on his clothes. It's early, isn't it? You're not due for another month. Babies come when they're ready, Lucy said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. We need to send for the midwife. Gideon ran to wake Paul, who immediately rode into town to fetch Mrs. Patterson, the midwife who attended most of the births in the area. While they waited, Gideon helped Lucy change into a clean nightgown and settled her in bed, his face tight with worry. What can I do? He asked. Tell me what you need. Just stay with me, Lucy said, gripping his hand as another contraction hit. Don't leave me. I won't. I'm right here. Mrs. Patterson arrived within the hour, a capable woman in her 50s who had delivered hundreds of babies. She examined Lucy quickly, then nodded with satisfaction. First babies usually take their time, but this one seems to be in a hurry. Could be born by morning. It was a long night. The pains came harder and faster, and Lucy clung to Gideon's hand, drawing strength from his presence. He never faltered, never left her side, murmuring encouragement and wiping her face with cool cloths. When Mrs. Patterson suggested he might want to wait downstairs, he flatly refused. I'm her husband. I'm staying. As dawn broke over the ranch, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lucy gave one final tremendous push, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of a baby crying. Mrs. Patterson worked quickly, and then she was placing a tiny, red-faced infant in Lucy's arms. A boy, the midwife announced with a smile. Small but healthy. He's got good lungs, that's certain. Lucy stared down at her son, overwhelmed with love and wonder. He was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. Hello, little one, she whispered. I'm your mother. Gideon leaned over them, his face full of awe. He's beautiful, Lucy. Absolutely beautiful. Do you want to hold him? Gideon took the baby with surprising confidence, cradling the small body against his chest. The baby immediately calmed, his cries quieting to small snuffles. Gideon looked down at him with an expression of such tender devotion that Lucy felt her heart might burst. Hey there, little man, Gideon said softly. Welcome to the world. I'm your father, and I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. That's a promise. Lucy watched them through tears of joy. Whatever mistakes she had made, whatever pain she had endured, it had all led her to this moment, to this man, to this life, to this perfect baby boy. What should we name him? She asked. Gideon thought for a moment. My father's name was Elijah. If you're agreeable, I'd like to name him that. Elijah Davis, Lucy said, testing the name. I love it. Over the next weeks, Lucy recovered her strength, while Gideon proved himself to be a devoted father. He would rock Elijah for hours when the baby was fussy, pace the floor with him in the middle of the night, talk to him constantly in that low, gentle voice. The ranch hands who came to see the baby marveled at how natural he was with the child. Never seen a man take to fatherhood so easy, Paul remarked one day. Most fellows are terrified to hold a newborn, but Gideon's like he was born for it. Lucy knew it was true. Gideon loved Elijah fiercely and completely, with no reservation or distinction that he was not the biological father. When people in town commented on how the baby had Gideon's dark hair, he would beam with pride. When Elijah smiled his first smile, Gideon rushed to find Lucy so they could marvel over it together. As spring turned to summer, Lucy settled into her role as wife and mother. The ranch prospered under Gideon's management, and the house was filled with laughter and love. Sometimes, lying in bed at night with Gideon beside her and Elijah sleeping in his cradle nearby, Lucy would think about how different her life might have been. If Thomas Granger hadn't died, she might have married an old man she didn't love and lived a half-life of obligation and gratitude. Instead, she had found real love, the kind that transformed everything it touched. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Gideon turned to her with a thoughtful expression. I've been thinking about something. What's that? About adopting Elijah, making it legal. I know I'm his father in every way that matters, but I want it official. I want there to never be any question about who he belongs to. Lucy felt tears spring to her eyes. "You'd do that?" "Lucy, I'd do anything for you and that boy. You're my family, the truest family I've ever had." "Then yes, yes, let's make it official." They went to Fort Stockton the following week and spoke to the lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Martin who had handled Thomas Granger's estate. He drew up the papers without comment, and Gideon signed them with a flourish, officially becoming Elijah's legal father. That night, they celebrated quietly at home, just the three of them. Gideon held Elijah up and said solemnly, "You're my son now, officially and forever. I'm going to do right by you, teach you everything I know, and make sure you grow up to be a good man." Elijah, who was 3 months old and had just discovered his toes, gurgled happily in response. As summer deepened and the heat settled over West Texas, the ranch thrummed with activity. The cattle were thriving, and Gideon made plans to expand the herd. He talked about the future constantly, about building up the ranch for Elijah, about maybe having more children if Lucy was willing, about growing old together on this land they both loved. "I want a big family," he told her one night as they lay in bed, Elijah asleep between them. "4 or 5 kids, running all over the place. This house is too quiet with just one baby." Lucy laughed. "Let me recover from this one first before we start planning the next." But she was not opposed to the idea. She loved being a mother, and she loved seeing Gideon as a father. The thought of filling the ranch house with children, of building a legacy together, filled her with happiness. In August, they received an unexpected visitor. Lucy was in the garden, harvesting vegetables with Elijah sleeping in a basket nearby, when a well-dressed man rode up to the house. Gideon, who had been working in the corral, went to meet him. Lucy couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Gideon's posture stiffen, saw his face grow hard. After a few minutes, the man rode away, and Gideon came over to where Lucy was standing. His jaw was tight, his eyes angry. "Who was that?" she asked. "A man named James Whitmore. Said he was passing through Fort Stockton on business and heard there was a woman named Lucy Hartford living out here. Said he wanted to see his son." Lucy felt the blood drain from her face. "James is here?" "Was here. I sent him away." Gideon's voice was flat. "He said he's been having second thoughts about abandoning you. Said his wife found out about the affair and left him, and now he's free to acknowledge the child. He wanted to see Elijah, maybe take him back east." "No." Lucy's voice came out fierce. "He gave up any right to Elijah when he turned his back on me. He doesn't get to waltz back into our lives now that it's convenient for him." "That's what I told him. I also told him that Elijah is my son, legally adopted, and that he has no claim. I suggested that if he knew what was good for him, he'd move on and forget he ever found you." "What did he say?" "He didn't like it, but he left. I don't think he'll be back. He struck me as the type who only cares about something until it becomes difficult." Gideon pulled her into his arms. "You don't need to worry, Lucy. I won't let anyone take our son away. Not him, not anyone." Lucy buried her face in his chest, feeling safe and protected. "I love you. I love you so much. I love you too. You and Elijah are mine, and I protect what's mine." James did not return, and as the weeks passed, Lucy allowed herself to relax again. She had a new life now, a real life, and the past could not touch her here. In September, as the brutal summer heat began to ease, Lucy discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, no shame, only joy. When she told Gideon, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with delight. "Another baby! Lucy, that's wonderful. Do you think it'll be a boy or a girl?" "I don't know, but either way, Elijah will have a sibling. Our family's growing," Gideon said, his voice full of wonder. "I can't believe how lucky I am." "We're both lucky," Lucy corrected. "I never thought I could be this happy." The pregnancy progressed easily, and Lucy continued to manage the household while Elijah grew from a baby into an active toddler. By the time their second child was born in May of 1879, Elijah was walking and starting to talk, calling Gideon Da and following him around the ranch whenever he could. The birth was easier than the first, and this time Lucy was delivered of a healthy baby girl with Gideon's dark eyes and Lucy's fair hair. They named her Margaret after Gideon's mother and called her Maggie. Gideon was utterly smitten with his daughter. He would hold her for hours, talking to her in that gentle voice, marveling at her tiny features. "She looks just like you," he told Lucy. "She's going to be beautiful." With two children, the house was fuller and louder, but neither of them minded. Gideon hired more help for the ranch so he could spend more time with his family, and Lucy found a rhythm that allowed her to care for the children while still maintaining the household. The years rolled by in a happy progression. In 1881, they had another son, whom they named Samuel. In 1883, twin girls arrived, Clara and Rose, much to everyone's surprise and delight. By 1885, with 5 children ranging from 7 years old to 2, the Davis household was a chaotic, joyful place. The ranch continued to prosper. Gideon's hard work and smart management had made them one of the more successful operations in the area, and they were able to add on to the house, creating more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They hired a woman from town to help Lucy with the children and the housework, giving her more time to spend with her growing family. Elijah, as the oldest, took his responsibilities seriously. He helped his father with the ranch work, learning to ride and rope, and looked after his younger siblings with a patience that made Lucy proud. He never questioned that Gideon was his father, never seemed to sense that there was any difference between himself and his brothers and sisters. Gideon had kept his promise and loved him absolutely, and that love had shaped Elijah into a confident, kind boy. On a warm evening in May of 1885, Lucy and Gideon sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Elijah was teaching Samuel to rope a fence post while the 3 girls played with a litter of puppies from the ranch dogs. The air was full of laughter and the sweet smell of spring grass. "Do you ever think about that day you arrived in Fort Stockton?" Gideon asked, his hand finding Lucy's. "How scared you must have been." "I think about it sometimes," Lucy admitted. "I was terrified. I had no idea what I was going to do, how I was going to survive. And then you showed up and changed everything." "I saw you," Gideon said softly, "standing in that wagon, trying so hard to be brave, hiding your pregnancy under that coat. And I saw your eyes and I knew you were a fighter, someone who would do anything to protect her child. That's when I started to fall in love with you, I think, right at that moment." "I fought against loving you at first," Lucy confessed. "I thought you were just being kind, that it was charity. It took me weeks to realize you actually cared about me as a person, not just as someone to pity. I never pitied you. I admired you. Still do." Gideon squeezed her hand. "You're the strongest person I know, Lucy Davis. You survived things that would have broken other people, and you built a life anyway. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something that matters. I thank God every day that Thomas's letter brought you here." "I thank God too," Lucy said. "For you, for our children, for this life we've built. I never imagined I could be this happy." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children. Elijah had successfully taught Samuel the basics of throwing a rope, and the little boy was crowing with delight. The girls had abandoned the puppies and were now picking wildflowers, making chains to wear as crowns. "Do you think we should tell him?" Lucy asked quietly. "Elijah, I mean, about where he came from?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. "Eventually, maybe, when he's older. But Lucy, as far as I'm concerned, Elijah came from us, from our love. The circumstances of his birth don't change that he's my son in every way that matters. I know. I just want him to hear it from us if he ever needs to know, not from some stranger or town gossip. Then we'll tell him together when the time is right." But not yet. Let him be a child a while longer. Lucy nodded, content with that answer. She leaned her head on Gideon's shoulder, and they watched their children until the sun set, and it was time to call them in for supper. That night, after the children were all in bed and the house was quiet, Lucy and Gideon lay together in their room. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting everything in silver. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucy asked. "Taking on so much? A pregnant woman you didn't know? 5 children, all this responsibility?" Gideon rolled to face her, his expression serious. "Never. Not once. You and those children are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we've built, it's everything I ever wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it." "I love you," Lucy said, as she had said so many times over the years. But it never got old, never lost its meaning. "I love you too," Gideon replied, and kissed her in the moonlight. "I'll love you both," I said that first day. "You and the baby. Turns out I was selling myself short. I love all 7 of you, more than life itself." 7? You, Elijah, Maggie, Samuel, Clara, Rose, and me. We're a family, Lucy. A real family. And nothing's ever going to change that. Lucy smiled and kissed him again, knowing he was right. They were a family, bound not just by blood, but by choice, by love, by the life they had built together on this ranch in West Texas. As the years continued to pass, the Davis family became a fixture in Fort Stockton. The children grew strong and healthy, educated by a tutor Lucy hired from town and by the practical lessons of ranch life. Elijah, in particular, showed a natural talent for ranching, and Gideon began teaching him the business side of things, preparing him to eventually take over. The ranch itself continued to expand. Gideon bought additional land, increased the herd, and built a reputation as a fair employer and a shrewd businessman. The money they earned was invested back into the property and into their children's futures. Lucy became involved in the community, helping to organize church socials and teaching other mothers about child rearing. She never spoke of her past, and the story of her being a widowed cousin who had come to help after Thomas Granger's death was so thoroughly believed that eventually even Lucy almost forgot it wasn't true. In 1890, when Elijah was 12 years old, the truth nearly came out in an unexpected way. A traveling preacher came through Fort Stockton, holding revival meetings and stirring up religious fervor. During one of his sermons, he spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the sin of children born out of wedlock. Elijah came home from town that day troubled, finding his mother in the kitchen. "Mama, what does it mean to be born out of wedlock?" Lucy's heart skipped a beat. "Why do you ask?" "The preacher in town was talking about it. He said children born that way are marked by sin. I don't understand what he meant." Lucy wiped her hands on her apron and sat down at the table, gesturing for Elijah to join her. Her mind raced. This was the moment she and Gideon had discussed, but hoped would come later, when Elijah was older and better equipped to understand. "Elijah, there's something your father and I need to tell you." "Where is he now?" "In the barn with Samuel." "Should I get him?" "Yes, please." A few minutes later, Gideon came in with Elijah and Samuel. Seeing Lucy's expression, he immediately understood. He sent Samuel outside to play with his sisters, then sat down next to Lucy, taking her hand. "Son," Gideon began, "your mother and I think it's time you knew some things about how you came to be part of this family." They told him the story then, as gently as they could, about Lucy coming to Texas as a mail-order bride, about Thomas Granger's death, about the baby she had been carrying. They told him about James, though they didn't speak his name or give details that might allow Elijah to find him someday. They told him about the decision to raise him as their own, about the adoption, about how from the very first moment Gideon had loved him as a son. Elijah listened quietly, his young face serious. When they finished, he was silent for a long time. "So you're not my real father?" he finally asked Gideon. "I am your real father," Gideon said firmly. "The man who gave you life was nothing more than that. I'm the one who's raised you, taught you, loved you every day of your life. That makes me your real father, Elijah. Blood doesn't make a family. Love does. And the preacher said children like me are marked by sin? The preacher is a fool, Lucy said fiercely. You are not marked by anything except love and goodness. The choices I made before you were born were mine, not yours. You are innocent and perfect, and anyone who says otherwise will answer to me. Elijah looked between his parents, processing this information. Then, to their surprise, he smiled. So you chose me, even though you didn't have to? Yes, Gideon said, I chose you. From the very first moment I knew about you, I wanted you to be my son. That's even better than just being born into a family, Elijah said thoughtfully. You picked me special. Lucy felt tears streaming down her face. Oh, my sweet boy, yes, we picked you special, and we'll always love you no matter what. Elijah came around the table and hugged them both. I love you too, both of you. And it doesn't matter what some preacher says. You're my parents, and that's all that matters. After that conversation, Elijah seemed to settle even more securely into himself. If anything, knowing that he was chosen rather than merely born into the family seemed to give him confidence. He held his head high in town, and if anyone made comments about the traveling preacher's sermons, he ignored them with the same dignity his father showed. The incident did, however, make Lucy and Gideon more protective of their younger children. They made sure all of them understood that family was about love and choice, not just blood. They taught them to stand up for each other, to face down gossip and judgment with grace and strength. In 1892, when Elijah was 14, he asked if he could change his name. Not my first name, he explained, but I want my middle name to be your first name, Pa. So I'll be Elijah Gideon Davis. Then I'll carry a piece of you with me always. Gideon was so moved he couldn't speak for a moment. I'd be honored, son. Truly honored. They made it legal that summer, and Elijah wore his new name with pride. The years continued to bring both challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle diseases and market fluctuations, injuries and illnesses. But through it all, the Davis family remained strong, bound together by love and commitment. Maggie grew into a beautiful young woman with a fierce intelligence and a talent for mathematics. Samuel became a skilled horseman with dreams of breeding the finest horses in Texas. The twins, Clara and Rose, were inseparable and shared a love of music, filling the house with songs and laughter. In 1898, when Elijah was 20 years old, he married a sweet-natured girl from Fort Stockton named Anna, and they settled in a house Gideon helped them build on the ranch property. A year later, they gave Lucy and Gideon their first grandchild, a boy they named Gideon Jr. Holding her grandson for the first time, Lucy marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 20 years ago, she had been a frightened, pregnant young woman with nowhere to go. Now she was a grandmother, surrounded by a large and loving family, secure in the knowledge that she was cherished and valued. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? She asked Gideon as they sat together watching Elijah with his newborn son. When you saw I was pregnant? I remember every word, Gideon said. I said I'd love you both, and I have, every single day. You've loved so much more than just the two of us, Lucy said, gesturing to their sprawling family. You've loved all of us, given us all a home and a future. You did that too, Lucy. We did it together. And they had. Together they had built something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love that had begun with a simple act of kindness and grown into something extraordinary. As the new century dawned, the Davis Ranch was one of the most prosperous in the region. Elijah managed much of the day-to-day operations now, allowing Gideon to slow down a bit, though he still couldn't stay away from the work entirely. Maggie had become a teacher in town. Samuel was making a name for himself with his horse breeding, and the twins had opened a small music school, teaching the children of Fort Stockton to sing and play instruments. Lucy, now in her 40s, spent her days managing the household with the help of her daughters and daughters-in-law, tending her garden, and spoiling her growing number of grandchildren. She had long since made peace with her past, understanding that every painful step had been necessary to bring her to this place, to this life. One evening in the spring of 1900, Lucy and Gideon took a walk along Comanche Creek, just the two of them. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance they could hear the lowing of cattle and the laughter of their children and grandchildren at the house. 22 years, Gideon said, taking Lucy's hand. 22 years since you stepped off that stagecoach and changed my life forever. Changed both our lives, Lucy corrected. I was so scared that day. I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, their fingers intertwined, their steps matching perfectly after so many years together. Do you have any regrets? Gideon asked. If you could go back and change things, would you? Lucy thought about it carefully. If I could change things, I would spare myself the pain of those early months in Philadelphia. The shame, the fear, the feeling of being cast out and alone. But if changing that meant I never came here, never met you, never had this life, then no, I wouldn't change a thing. Every moment of pain was worth it to get to where we are now. I feel the same, Gideon said. I'm grateful for every twist of fate that brought you to me, even my uncle's death, as sad as that was, because it meant you came into my life. Thomas would have been a decent husband to you, I think, but he couldn't have loved you the way I do. He couldn't have given you what we've built together. No, Lucy agreed. This was meant to be. You and me, our children, this ranch, this life. All of it was meant to be. They stopped walking and turned to face each other. Gideon cupped Lucy's face in his hands, looking at her with the same intensity he had shown that first day when he had promised to love her and her baby. You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, he said softly. And I love you more now than I did the day we married. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too, Lucy said, her voice thick with emotion. You saved me, Gideon. You saved me and Elijah, and you gave us a family and a home. You gave us everything. You saved me too, Gideon replied. I was so lonely before you came. I didn't even realize how much I needed someone to share my life with until you were there, filling up all the empty spaces. You made me whole, Lucy. They kissed as the sun set over the Texas landscape, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. In the distance, they could hear someone calling them to come back for supper, the voices of their family carrying on the evening breeze. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house, toward the warmth and light and laughter that waited for them, toward the life they had created together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. As they climbed the porch steps, Elijah came out to meet them, little Gideon Jr. on his hip. There you two are. Anna's got supper ready, and the kids are getting impatient. Can't have that, Gideon said with a smile, ruffling his grandson's hair. Lead the way, son. They went inside together, into the house that had been made a home by love and commitment, and the simple decision of one man to say, I'll love you both, and mean it with his whole heart. The years ahead would bring more joys and sorrows, more challenges and triumphs. There would be more grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. There would be droughts and diseases, economic downturns, and personal losses. But through it all, Lucy and Gideon would face everything together, their love growing stronger with each passing year. In 1920, at the age of 64, Lucy passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Gideon, who was 68, grieved deeply, but found comfort in the family they had built together. He lived another 5 years, spending his final days telling stories to his great-grandchildren about their grandmother, about how brave and beautiful she had been, about how she had changed his life with her courage and her love. When Gideon finally passed in 1925, he was buried next to Lucy in the family cemetery on the ranch. The headstone read simply, Gideon Davis, beloved husband, father and grandfather. He loved well. And beneath Lucy's name were the words, Lucy Davis, beloved wife, mother and grandmother. She was cherished. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear, acceptance over judgment, and family over the narrow definitions of blood and biology. And somewhere in the house, in a cedar chest in the attic, lay the oversized woolen coat Lucy had worn that January day in 1878, the coat that had hidden her pregnancy but couldn't hide her desperation or her hope. It remained there as a reminder of where the family had come from, of the courage it took to start over, and of the transformative power of love freely given. The story of Lucy and Gideon became family legend, passed down to each new generation. The tale of how a frightened mail order bride found unexpected love with a cowboy who looked past her circumstances and saw the woman she truly was. The story of how he had promised to love them both and had kept that promise every day of his life. It was a story of second chances and chosen families, of love that transcends conventional boundaries, of the way grace and kindness can change the trajectory of a life. It was a story that reminded the Davis descendants that family was not just about blood, but about commitment and choice and the daily decision to show up for the people you loved. Elijah, who lived to be 92 years old, never forgot the lesson his parents had taught him. He passed it on to his own children and grandchildren, telling them about the day his mother and father had sat him down and explained that he was chosen, not just born into the family, and how that had made him feel special and loved beyond measure. My father was the best man I ever knew, Elijah would say in his later years. He didn't have to love me, but he did. From the very beginning, he chose me, and that choice shaped everything I became. The ranch thrived for generations, adapting to the changing times, but never losing the essential character that Lucy and Gideon had given it. It remained a place of hard work and hospitality, of strong values and open hearts, of family loyalty and community involvement. And every year, on the anniversary of Lucy's arrival in Fort Stockton, the family would gather at the cemetery to lay flowers on the graves of their matriarch and patriarch, remembering the love story that had started it all. The story of a woman who had the courage to start over and a man who had the heart to give her that chance. It was a story that proved that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that redemption was always possible, and that the family you chose could be just as strong as the family you were born into. It was a story of the American West in all its harsh beauty and unexpected grace, a story of survival and triumph, of mistakes and forgiveness, of love that endured beyond death itself. And at the heart of it all was a simple promise made on a cold January day in 1878. I'll love you both. A promise kept, a life transformed, a legacy built. That was the story of Lucy Hartford and Gideon Davis, and it lived on in every generation that followed. A reminder that love was always the answer, always the way forward, always the thing that made life worth living. Their story became part of the larger tapestry of Fort Stockton's history, told alongside tales of cattle drives and frontier justice, of droughts survived and fortunes made. But it was unique in its tenderness, in its emphasis on emotional courage rather than physical bravery, on the quiet heroism of choosing love over convenience. The house they had shared, expanded and modernized over the years, but still recognizably the same structure, stood as a monument to their love. The rooms where they had laughed and fought and made up and raised their children echoed with memories of their voices. The porch where they had sat on countless evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams, remained a favorite gathering place for family reunions. And in the hearts of every descendant who bore the Davis name, or who had married into the family and been embraced as fully as Lucy had embraced Elijah, lived the legacy of that first act of acceptance, the legacy of looking past circumstances to see the person underneath, the legacy of choosing love. For Lucy and Gideon had shown that love was not about perfect circumstances or ideal conditions. It was about seeing someone who needed help and extending your hand. It was about making a commitment and honoring it, even when it was difficult. It was about building something day by day, choice by choice, until you looked back and realized you had created something beautiful and lasting. Their love story was not one of instant passion or dramatic gestures, though it had its share of both. It was a story of steady devotion, of showing up every day, of choosing each other over and over again. It was a story of two wounded people who found healing in each other, of two lonely souls who found home. And it all started with a frightened woman stepping off a stagecoach, clutching her coat around her secret, hoping for mercy and finding love instead. With a man who looked past what society said was proper or acceptable and saw only a woman who needed help and a baby who needed a father. With a promise made and kept, I'll love you both. In the end, that was the entirety of their legacy and the totality of their triumph. They had loved well and been loved in return. They had built a family and a home. They had faced every challenge together and come through stronger. They had proved that love was the most powerful force in the world, capable of transforming everything it touched. And when the final accounting was made, when all their achievements were tallied and all their struggles remembered, what mattered most was that simple, profound truth. They had loved each other, wholly and completely, from that first day to their last, and that love had changed everything. The sun set over the Davis Ranch, as it had for more than a century, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In the house, lights glowed warm and welcoming. Voices carried on the evening breeze, the voices of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all part of the family that Lucy and Gideon had started, all proof that love, real love, endured. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when this life is done, Lucy and Gideon were together still, looking down on all they had created, satisfied that they had done well, that their love had mattered, that their story would continue to inspire long after they were gone. It was a happy ending, the kind every love story deserves. A happy ending that had started with heartbreak and fear, but had transformed through courage and kindness into something beautiful. A happy ending that proved that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Lucy had been a mail-order bride hiding her pregnancy under her coat, desperate and afraid. Gideon had been a lonely cowboy running a ranch and wondering if he'd ever have a real family. Together, they had become something more than either could have been alone. They had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of acceptance and grace. And it had all come down to one moment, one choice, one promise. I'll love you both. Those 4 words had changed everything. They had built a family, secured a legacy, and proved that love was always, always worth the risk. That was their story. That was their gift to all who came after. And it was enough. More than enough, it was everything